Glory of Heracles is one of the most slept on RPGs you'll find on a DS, and sees you following Heracles, or at least you think you are, as in true RPG fashion you find yourself suffering with amnesia, not knowing what's true or real. Even though it's a real common trope within the genre, the way it's handled here is done really well, with the story being a real positive of the overall adventure. It sees you setting out with a friend to explore the Greek Isles by boat, with each new piece of land bringing its own challenge and turn in the story. And even though the setup would lend itself to an open-ended approach, it's very much a linear adventure, but that doesn't take away from what the game gets so right, and that's the gameplay. It all comes together with a traditional take on the genre, with you having many towns and dungeons to explore, and a huge cast of characters from those that join your party to simple NPCs that really add to the overall weight of the story. But for me, it's the battle system that really helps Glory of Heracles hit home. It all plays out within a turn-based system, with your party of 4 heroes being set against a wide range of different enemy types. But what makes it a bit different from the other RPGs that you'll find on the DS is the inclusion of a 2x4 grid, where you're free to place all of your party members either in the front row, where they're able to perform melee attacks, whereas the ones in the back can only perform ranged abilities. Because of this, it's best to build your team with this in mind and focus on what works best for each individual character. Overall, it's not exactly the most daring of RPGs, but for those of you who are fans of the old school approach, Glory of Heracles is definitely worth adding to your collection. Tales of the Tempest is the sort of black sheep of the series, and was the first 3D Tales game to arrive on handhelds that didn't exactly resonate with all of the fans. For one, it never released outside of Japan, but thanks to the work of the community, you're now able to play it in English, and for all of its faults, I still had a lot of fun playing through it. It's essentially a Tales game for beginners, and even though its admittedly short runtime is a bit of a letdown, for anyone looking for an easygoing RPG to jump into, it's a real great choice. When it comes to the story, Tempest is set on the continent of Arula, that fell victim to a huge conflict known as the Beast Wars that completely changed the world. Now 100 years later, you take up the fight as Caius, a half-beast, half-human boy, as you're hunted down by those that deem you an abomination. How the game differs from the previous games in the series was how the battle system worked, and instead of just having one plane to fight on, it was split up into 3. This gave the game a huge boost when it came to strategy during each fight. Sadly though, by giving the player the ability to use the touchscreen to attack, it generally devolves into just endlessly tapping on enemies. Thankfully though, during some of the more difficult fights, that won't work at all. As with many of the other games in the series, you'll be joined by a party of friends, who each have different roles to play on the battlefield, so it's a good idea to switch them out and experiment with their styles in order to form a sound strategy for some of the later fights in the game, where the amount of challenge really ramps up. As I mentioned, even though it's quite short, the game does offer up several side quests to help flesh out the adventure, and for all of its faults, there's plenty of positives that end up outweighing them. The River King series began way back on the NES and introduced players to the novel idea of mixing both fishing and RPG elements to create something truly unique. It all focuses on a young boy trying to save his sister from a deadly disease, and the only cure lies in catching a legendary creature known as the Guardian Fish, which sees you searching across the world's rivers, lakes and seas in the hopes of one day being able to catch it. The story unfolds like any other RPG, with you visiting a range of different villages and interacting with a cast of NPCs that offer up clues and trade opportunities as you work towards your goal. What sets it apart from other RPGs on the DS is that rather than battles being at the centre of the gameplay, fishing is the main draw and your means to advance throughout the game. There are just over 40 different fish to catch, each requiring specific bait, lures or rods, which adds a bit of depth to the otherwise simple mechanics that the game employs. It creates a nice loop of experimentation, as each catch can be traded for gold, which can then be spent on new equipment to increase your chances of scoring larger fish. The world is split up into various areas that are filled with markets and areas to explore, as well as the rivers to cast your line. But what makes it a bit more interesting is that predators will try to attack you and steal your fish. These take the form of turn-based battles and end up being an unexpected but welcome addition to the game, allowing you to slowly level up and stand your ground. This blend of fishing, trading and combat is at the centre of what River King is all about, and it creates an addictive and rewarding experience that is bound to keep you hooked. I've always been a huge fan of Bomberman, but more so when it comes to the several RPG spin-offs that we've been getting since the days of the Game Boy. Now Story DS is by far one of the best of the bunch. Much like the other RPGs in the series, the story is pretty light-hearted and upbeat, and sees Bomberman working as an agent for the Justice Department, where you're sent to look into several kidnappings that have occurred throughout the galaxy. It's all clearly aimed at a younger audience and feels like it's only there to facilitate the gameplay, but don't let it put you off. Speaking of gameplay, this is where Bomberman's story truly comes into its own and seamlessly blends the traditional gameplay of the series with several RPG elements that make it incredibly hard to put down. As you would have guessed, bombs play a huge role in not only taking on one of the many different types of enemies that you'll come across, but also in the various environmental puzzles that are scattered throughout the 5 different worlds that you'll be visiting. Now each time you defeat an enemy, you'll earn a small amount of experience points as well as a bit of loot, with your experience eventually leading to a level up, which makes you a lot stronger over time. You don't only have the ability to drop bombs, but also being able to throw them from a distance and allows you to stay safe and avoid losing hearts. To top this off, there's up to 6 different types of these bombs that all have different properties, from ones that lure enemies in to those that explode into fireballs that spread, adding plenty of different ways to deal with the various situations that you'll find yourself in. Overall, regardless of its somewhat simplistic story, if you're at all like me and are a fan of Bomberman, you owe it to yourself to try this one out. Magical Starsign follows the adventure of 6 friends as they set out to find their missing teacher in an adventure that takes place amongst the stars and sees you travelling via a spaceship to several planets, which are all represented by different elements. Now when it comes to gameplay, it's your pretty standard RPG fare and sees you investigating each of these planets, talking to NPCs and finding items and weapons to make the journey all the more manageable. Naturally, these worlds are made up of a series of towns and dungeons, and although it's extremely linear, it's the battles that help mix up the otherwise monotonous nature of the exploration. Each of them are presented in a turn-based fashion, with all of the characters having their own skills and abilities as well as affinity with a specific element. But that's not all you've got to contend with, as helping to spice up each encounter even more is the row system. This is where a lot of the strategy comes into play, as most common enemies can be defeated by simply throwing out random attacks, but the far tougher bosses require a tactical touch, by placing your powerhouses at the front who can deal devastating amounts of damage and your magic users in the back providing support. You're able to tackle nearly anything the game throws at you, but of course you still have to keep in mind the elemental factor, which can flip the tide of a battle in a flash. What helps the system stand out is the way in which you carry out your attacks that usually require you to use the stylus and tap your character whilst casting spells. By doing so, you can potentially add more damage to the attack, and the same can be said for when it comes to defending. It's not exactly original, but it's a great little touch that adds to each encounter. Overall, if you're a fan of RPGs, then Magical Starsign is a game that will not disappoint, so if you've never played it, now is the perfect time to jump into it. Contact is perhaps one of the strangest RPGs that the DS received, and right from the beginning it's clear that it's not going to be a run-of-the-mill adventure. It all centres on a strange scientist that hops from planet to planet on a spaceship, who's joined by a kid known as Terry, who are forced to land after an issue with the engines. As a result, it sees his cargo being scattered across the Earth, and you're tasked with tracking it all down and ultimately helping him repair the ship. Now the game is essentially split up into a series of islands, where you've got to guide Terry through the use of the D-pad or stylus, but what makes it a bit different from other action RPGs is the battle system. Whereas in other games you're free to attack enemies by yourself, here in Contact you've got a sort of battle mode that's turned on with a touch of a button and sees Terry automatically attacking enemies within a certain range. To be fair, it does have the potential to come across as rather dull, but for me it felt like a nice change of pace instead of having to mash the same button over and over again to take them down. Another difference from the norm is the way leveling up works in the game, and instead of gaining traditional levels, your individual stats for strength, health and attack all increase depending on how often you complete a certain action. For example, the more you attack, the more your strength will increase. And to go along with this, there are several outfits that can be worn throughout the game that basically act as different classes and give you a certain skill set whilst wearing them, such as being able to use magic or increasing your stats, and they're all often hidden throughout the game, which encourages you to explore for a meaningful reward. In the end, Contact isn't a game for all, but for those of you out there looking for something entirely unique, it's definitely worth a shot. Sands of Destruction is based on the anime World Destruction and mainly conveys the same story, with the player taking on the role of Kairi, a typical RPG hero from a small town who soon finds himself entangled in a plot to destroy the world himself. Despite this, Kairi is surprisingly upbeat and comical, creating a huge contrast to the somewhat morbid nature of the story. But what sets Sands of Destruction apart from others of its kind on the DS is the gameplay. It utilizes a turn-based combat system complemented by a relatively low encounter rate, and if you're familiar with the likes of Xenogears, the mechanics will feel instantly familiar. You can choose between two types of attacks, Flurry and Blow. Flurry provides a series of weak attacks while Blow deals more damage, and all of them are dependent on battle points, which you earn by performing moves and scoring critical hits. In addition to these attacks, you can also use various magic abilities to heal, buff or attack enemies from a distance, and as you defeat them, you'll receive both experience and customization points, which allow you to modify your character's attacks and abilities. The only major issue I had with the game was the difficulty balance throughout the adventure. Early on, you'll experience alarming spikes in difficulty that don't feel natural based on the time you've spent playing, which sees you having to grind from very early on. While this may not be a problem for most RPG fans, those unfamiliar with grinding might find it more than they can handle. Despite this minor flaw, Sands of Destruction is a solid game that will likely appeal to longtime fans of the genre and those seeking a bit of a challenge. With its intriguing story and engaging gameplay mechanics, it's definitely worth giving a try. The Mana series has been around for quite some time and usually takes the form of an action RPG, but with Heroes on the DS it was completely flipped and instead delved into the world of real-time strategy. Thanks to the stylus input, it was made possible to bring what is arguably only strong on PC to the portable space, and even though the change was a bit too much for some long-time fans to swallow, Heroes is still a respectable entry in the franchise. When it comes to the story, this is where the game truly shines, and it sees you taking command of several characters who work on behalf of the region of Peda. After some rather concerning discoveries are raised about the region's past, you and your allies band together to seek answers, and more importantly, justice for those throughout the kingdom. The whole game is structured into a series of missions that take place on the battlefield, with you having the ability to place up to 25 units at a time. All of them can be replenished with a simple tap by entering what is known as the Night Swan, where you're free to select what you need for the situation at hand. This is where the intuitiveness of the stylus control comes into play, and moving and directing your units is an absolute breeze. By simply drawing a circle around them, you can then command them to move or attack, with each of the units having their own specific roles, from those that attack from a distance to those that excel up close and personal. There's a lot of strategy to be had during each fight, and although it can become quite hectic during some of the harder battles towards the end, by forming the right approach and taking advantage of everything you have, it ends up becoming one of the best examples of an RTS on the system. Much like its name implies, nostalgia is somewhat of a tribute to the RPGs of old, which all centres around a young boy known as Eddie who sets out to find his father, a famous adventurer who's gone missing. Along the way, you'll be making friends and exploring the world, and ultimately end up getting drawn into a much broader narrative that ends up becoming one of the true highlights of the game. What makes it so enjoyable are the various locations you'll be visiting throughout the adventure, from London to India, Egypt and Japan, with it all being set in the 19th century in a sort of steampunk version of the world. For just how enjoyable the story and setting ends up being, the gameplay itself is just as good, and apart from exploring the world and taking on various side quests, the turn-based battles is where you'll find yourself spending most of your time. Each of the party members get their own unique abilities that are best suited for certain types of enemies, and as you grow, you slowly begin to unlock and learn new skills that drastically increase your chances of standing your ground in each fight. A huge standout though is the inclusion of an airship, and much like Skies of Arcadia, you not only get to travel the world using it, but also get into fights as well. And just as Eddie gets new abilities as you progress, so does your ship in the form of new parts that can be customized to your liking, from different types of cannons to upgrades for your engine. Nostalgia is a throwback to the golden days of RPGs, and even though it doesn't do anything that you wouldn't have seen before, it plays out so well that it easily becomes one of the best RPGs that you can find on the system. It's just a shame that it never got the recognition it deserved when it first released. The fusion between the Wizard of Oz and the world of RPGs is probably the last thing you would think of happening, but back in 2009, MediaVision brought us Beyond the Yellow Brick Road, which was a complete reimagining of the classic movie, all the while retaining aspects of it that longtime fans know and love. You take on the part of Dorothy and soon come into contact with many of the other well-known characters as you're tasked by Oz himself to track down 10 mysterious eggs scattered throughout the kingdom in order for him to become the king again. What at first seems like a simple goal soon opens up into a grand adventure that sees you visiting a huge range of locations and meeting a cast of charming NPCs that really add to the world that the game creates. In terms of gameplay, simple would be the best way to describe it, as nearly every aspect throughout the game is handled by using the stylus, from movement to selecting your attacks, and because of it, the game opens itself up to players of all ages and skill levels. But once you dig deeper, it's clear that its simple exterior hides a lot more depth than you would imagine. This comes from the several RPG systems that comprise the game, and of course you've got battles which are all presented in a turn-based fashion, and you'll be earning experience points and leveling up along the way. Here you'll unlock several abilities, as well as have the opportunity to switch up your equipment that can be found throughout the world, and severely impact your party's effectiveness against enemies. This is by far one of the console's most endearing RPGs. The gameplay and the visuals and music add up to create something that will captivate anyone who plays it. So if you're looking for an RPG on a DS, don't let this one slip by without trying it for yourself. Well, that does it for today's video. Keep an eye out for part 2 as that'll be coming up soon, so don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell to get notified about new videos. You can follow me on all of the socials which are linked below to stay up to date, and also join my growing community on Discord to meet many like-minded gamers to continue the conversation with. I'd like to give a special shout out to my Patreon supporters which are on screen right now for their continued support that helps make these videos possible. If you're at all interested in joining the Discord or supporting the Patreon, you'll find all of these links down below. As always, thanks for taking the time to check the video out. I'll catch you next time.